Welcome to That Digital Take. I'm your host, Tori Webster. This episode of That Digital Take is brought to you by Chatter's Hair Salon, proudly Canadian and your go-to destination for all things hair for over 30 years. Whether you're refreshing your color, trying a bold new style, or stocking up on your favorite products, Chatter's has you covered. And right now, they are treating my listeners to an exclusive offer. Get 20% off your retail purchase online with code DIGITAL20 at checkout. Some exclusions apply. Don't miss out. Visit chatters.ca and give your hair the care it deserves. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to That Digital Take. Happy Monday. Hopefully the cadence has been hitting you really nice the last 3 weeks. I hope you enjoyed our guest last week. I loved having Sarah on the pod. That was so fun. And I have some other very exciting guests coming on in the next few weeks. So if you have anyone that you do think that's either in the Toronto area or people in the creative industries, whether it's marketing, influencer, photography, whatever it might be, if you have people that you would love to hear on the pod, please DM me. I'd love to hear who you want on, and I can chase after them and try to get them on the podcast. So hopefully you're enjoying some of those longer format episodes with guests, but today it's just me. So hopefully you enjoy these solo episodes as well. Now, quick update off to New York City with Apple tomorrow. We have a cool briefing taking place. This is really random, but sometimes I get invited on these trips and I have no insight into what is actually happening. So for this, I had to sign an NDA. I don't know what product is actually going to be either like announced and or exposed. But I will be in New York learning about that new product tomorrow. I'm really excited about it. It usually means that I get to capture content first, meaning I'm like the first influencer that gets to, well, me and a few others, but I'm one of the first Canadian influencers to actually get my hands on the product and capture content. And usually that leads to some really fun viral content as well because I'm the first one to do it. So that's really exciting. Okay, so today's going to be a bit of a very funny episode because, again, like I always say to you guys, I get inspired to do these episodes based on what's actually happening in my day-to-day life. Now, for context, creating net new content for me can sometimes feel really hard. Sometimes you're in like a creative flow and it's really easy and you're coming up with new series and you're coming up with new, that we call it like the bread and butter in the creative industries. Like, what's your bread and butter? Like, what is the content that's always going to hit, always going to perform, always going to resonate with your audience? For me, that bread and butter content is a few things. Sometimes it's tied to travel. I think my audience really likes when I do travel content. Or again, like I was just alluding to, like first look content, whether that's like a first look at, a cruise line or a first look at a product, that tends to do really well because it's, again, net new. People haven't seen it before. It's exciting. It's innovative. It's all of those things. And then finally, a little bit of that bread and butter content for me can sometimes be product integration. So like I said, the Apple product, or another thing could be like a clothing launch. If I'm doing like a new Aritzia blazer, for example. So these are kind of the things when I have in my strategy book of like bread and butter content. Now for every creator, that's going to look really different. For some people that could be food related. It could be wellness related. It could be recipe related. It's really whatever your audience goes to you for when looking for recommendations. So that kind of led me to the topic of this week. And part of it is because of my current cadence with my content. Now, like I said, coming up with net new content can be challenging. And sometimes when you go through those, I guess you'd call them a creative blip, where you just feel uninspired or you don't necessarily know where to lean or where to go. Leaning on that bread and butter content can mean that you just are still keeping your feet alive and keeping, the algorithms alive by just like feeding it content that you know that it's going to like. Now, on the flip side to that, I feel like every year you almost have to re-strategize what that content looks like. Sure, maybe last year what performed well was travel content, but maybe this year I want to be doing more home content or more podcast content or whatever that might look like. So reframing those strategies can sometimes feel important. Now, that's what led me down a little bit of a rabbit hole because for a long time, I would say honestly, since the rise of TikTok, so 2020, so that's almost coming up 5 years, which is insane. I feel like the backbone of my content has been built on product recommendations. Now, that's not to say that it's good or bad. And like last week's episode, go with me with a little bit of nuance. But I do think that pushing out product all the time can be one, a bit hard on the audience, and then obviously two, a bit hard on me because I'm always looking for that new exciting product to talk about or to review or to do a haul for. So all that to say, that led me to this week's topic, which is the rise of de-influencing. So this is a topic that has come up a lot, and I think we've discussed it lightly on the podcast, but it's really worth doing a deeper dive. So is this the end of influencer culture as we know it? Because we've all seen the massive hauls, we know the endless must-have videos and the push to buy, and it's almost dramatically buy content. Like, hey, buy this blazer, hey, buy this new Apple product, hey, buy this, buy that. And again, I'm not coming at it from a negative perspective. This is literally my job, right? So I have a bit of a different relationship with it, but it is, I guess where my conflict is coming in is it's starting to affect my creativity. And so if that's the case, I do feel like I need to go backwards, and I can sense the shift. And the weird thing is, I've been talking about it for a few months, and I guess I couldn't really pinpoint what I was talking about. Every time I would chat with another creator, I mean, Sarah and I were alluding to it on last week's episode. I think I was even alluding to it back in 2024. Oh my God, I'm losing track of my years and my speaking patterns. But creators are obviously taking a step back and saying, wait, do we actually need all of these products? Or even more on the nose, does my audience even need this product? So all that to say, I had been alluding to things prior about feeling this overwhelming shift, and I couldn't really put my finger on what that was. I think what it is this wave of de-influencing. And it's showing up in my feed, and then it's also showing up in my workflow with my brands. So I think that's why we now have to take a bigger step back and then consider this topic, but also maybe consider how this will affect the industry as a whole. So we saw this wave of de-influencing happening kind of around the 2023 mark. That's kind of when I started to hear about it most. And it was calling out products that weren't worth the hype. So this was, again, in the rise of TikTok, but the overpriced beauty must-haves, the TikTok viral gadgets, obviously, and then people reviewing them and being like, okay, this shit kind of barely works. And so now de-influencing has evolved into this broader critique of influencer culture and this larger conversation of overconsumption. And obviously, this mentality has shifted the way that we have to create content, which is stressful, but it's also real. So creators are no longer just telling people what not to buy. They're questioning the entire culture of buying for content versus just buying something because you actually love it. Okay, so then this leads me down another rabbit hole and a question. Are influencers responsible for overconsumption, or are they just giving people what they actually want? And I am challenged by this constantly because I look, again, back to my original statement, the bread and butter of my content, which is reviewing products, reviewing my experience on a certain trip or with a certain brand. And that's what gets clicks. Like, people love to see those reviews. But then in the same breath, people could be like, oh, Tori's a sellout. Oh, Tori has too many brand partners. Oh, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the list goes on. So again, I don't have the answer for that question. I'm asking out to the audience, like, what can we do about this? Can de-influencing and influencing exist in the same space? I believe it can. I really do believe it can. But I do think that it's tricky. And I don't think that every influencer has the ability to do this. I think that there's certain influencers that are doing an amazing job at it. And this is where I actually will tip my hat to Gen Z. I know I talk shit about them like it's my job, but what I will say is Gen Z is very good at showing up online very authentically, no telephone voice, really just turning on the camera and chatting like they're on FaceTime to their audience. And I think because of that, their audiences really trust their recommendations. And I love that for them. I think that there is something very... I guess authentic is such a bad buzzword, but it's true. It's like there's something very authentic about the way that they show up. And because of that, their audience really can appreciate when they give a product reco. I think my generation of influencers, people that came up in the blogger era, people that have been online for 5, 10 plus years, there is a little bit of a divide. And again, I put myself in this category of someone that maybe is a little bit too media trained. And we've talked about this before, but it's like the media training can sometimes infiltrate the branding. Is there almost a veil? Like, is there a veil over the content that makes it feel too, like, perfect, I guess, for lack of a better word? And when that's the case, then do we not believe people when they give product recommendations, if that makes sense. So again, this leads to something else, which is the rise of a different type of influencer. And this is people that are talking about kind of, what is that called? Like, it's like the wardrobes, like, I forget the name, but investment pieces as opposed to like all of this endless shopping, or fewer but better pieces, but like buying quality over quantity, but also, yeah, avoiding fast fashion. There's a word for the type of closet, but whatever. You guys, you get what I'm saying. You're purchasing investment pieces and fewer but better pieces over endless shopping hauls. Okay, so let's break this into 3 categories just so that we can compose our thoughts. You guys know I love a list. This just keeps things organized, okay? So number 1, the trust factor. So why are audiences tired of overconsumption? And there's also the skepticism. Can I speak today? Skepticism is at an all-time high because people don't just want recommendations. They want this insane, radical transparency from their influencers. They want us to show up online and say like, hey, I was gifted this, but I wouldn't repurchase this. And they love that content. They love that really real, raw content. Now, every influencer is going to tell you this, but it's really tricky to give honest reviews on gifted product for a few reasons. 1, brands are often giving you gifted product because they want a positive review. They don't really want you to go online and be like, hey, by the way, here's the latest powder. I actually think it's terrible. And I have openly said on my channels, I struggle with this because I don't want to use my place, 1, as a place of negativity where I'm throwing a brand under the bus or saying that I don't love the product. Typically, when I err on the side of not liking something, I just won't talk about it. Now, does that make me a bad influencer? I don't know. You tell me. But I would rather give you product recommendations on things I actually love and I'm using and are, moving the needle for me, rather than like spreading negativity online and just giving brands a negative review. I hope that that's fair. Again, every influencer is going to have a different relationship with how they view gifted products, but that's my relationship with gifted products. And I think that that's a fair one to have. Now, people also like when we call out brands, or we also push back against brands, whether they're using deceptive marketing strategies or tactics. Like, think about brands that are sending like PR boxes without disclosure expectations. Like, we won't actually say #ad, or we won't say sponsored, or influencers are feeling pressured to say everything is a must-have product. And I've noticed this a lot in my briefs, right? Like from brands, they'll be like, oh, this is the must-have lipstick, for example. And it's like, like that's so tricky to say because not every single lipstick is going to be the must-have lipstick. And it's the language that brands are choosing as well to put behind their products that becomes tricky for influencers to get behind. Now, here's the other side of it. Are audiences finally seeing through the sponsored content, or are creators just getting better at being honest? Now, again, I will put myself in this camp. And I mean, this is actually not something that I'm proud to admit, but there have definitely been times where I've not disclosed being paid for a product. Like maybe I had just left #ad out of the caption, whether I had not put a sponsored toggle on. And I am not recommending you do this. All I'm saying is when I was first starting out, firstly, the laws were a lot less strict back then. It was just like truly the Wild West. Now, obviously, there are laws in place on the internet. You do have to disclose when you're getting paid for product recommendations. But yeah, like in my early years, I can admit like there were times where I would not be putting ad because I thought it would help the performance, whatever it might be. Like no excuse is going to feel right, but it is true. Like I have gone through different stages where I haven't always disclosed that things were being paid for. Now, that's not obviously nice to admit, but on the flip side to that, to this point that I've just made, I do think that it is important for influencers to be really honest about what they're being paid for and what is like an organic review. And you'll hear people now even say in their Instagram stories, they'll say, oh, this is not sponsored. And that almost sucks that we have to kind of like quantify when things are not sponsored. Because again, it goes back to our credibility. I think that because when we start to work with brands and we have too much sponsored content, or we just start with any #ad, immediately audiences don't like that, which again, like I see both sides, and I am so perplexed by this as a concept as a whole, because as a consumer, I really don't mind seeing ads, especially when it's coming from influencers that I enjoy following. And when I know that they're working with brands that fit very organically into their lifestyles, I don't mind it at all. And again, maybe I have the extra added benefit of being on the other side of it. So I understand what it's like to be on the influencer piece and to work with a brand. But I also think as long as the content is high quality and it still is feeling like something you would post organically, what's wrong with an influencer working with a brand that they love. This is such an aside. I'm sorry. This topic is so leveled because there are so many branches to this tree. But again, back to the credibility piece. So the shift towards credibility-based influencing, people obviously trust creators who call things out and don't just hype up every single product. And I do totally get that. So this leads to another question. Do you think influencers should turn down more brand deals to remain authentic? And every guest that I've had on the show, we've kind of discussed this as well. Like, do you have a brand deal that you regret or not taking? And pretty much everyone has been like, if it's getting to the place where I'm accepting it and signing a contract and working with a brand, I love the brand and I want to work with them. And I think that that's amazing. I do think that there is already less brand deals to go around just based on the economy and based on the way that we're shifting in the digital landscape. So it is a tall ask to say, hey, influencers, stop taking this many brand deals, because again, when we go back to the original statement of this episode, this is like the bread and butter for people. Like having brand deals around their content for some, and if not most influencers, is making up at least 70 to 80% of their income, right? So we do have to consider the larger impact that this will have on the creator economy. Okay, heading into topic number 2. The brands that will survive in this era, and then the brands that will lose in this new era of de-influencing. So the brands that will win are obviously the brands that are adapting. And we've talked about this in the past, but those are brands that are embracing fewer but more intentional partnerships. So important, working with people that actually align with your brand values and not just looking at numbers. In every case, not just looking at follower count, but also not just working with every single influencer. Now, those allowing influencers to have creative control and honest opinions on their product, again, are going to reign superior in this new era. It goes back to what Gen Z is doing really well. They show up online and they just give honest opinions on brands. And those are always the videos where the products go mega viral and the product goes shuffling off the shelf immediately. So we do have to look at that as a strategy and say, okay, clearly something is working here. Paid media as a whole can sometimes have a negative effect on a campaign. And that's so hard for me to say because that's obviously the brand dollars that would be going to someone like me. But I do believe it's true. Like the honest reviews always do the best. And sometimes I see it in both sides. What's really exciting is when a brand will see an honest review and it'll go viral, or it won't go viral, but it'll hit like a really niche audience and they'll see amazing conversion. And then they will pay that influencer and work with them in a more strategic way. And I think that makes for a really cool brand collaboration. You've had an influencer already organically talk about you, things have gone well, and now you'll pay them for their work and creative work in a new way. Maybe that's the way forward to find brand partnerships that feel a bit more aligned. Now, the next thing, brands that invest in quality over quantity. And we've already alluded to this, but obviously like launching fewer products is so important. Having less products will allow for more key messaging. And it really stresses me out when brands have like new launches every month. I feel like those are the brands where I just like immediately am not interested in them anymore. Let me think of a brand that does this really well. I feel like Summer Fridays, the beauty brand, does an amazing job at this. They launch very few products, but every product they do launch, there is strategy behind it and there's a story behind it. Like right now, they were just teasing their new eye masks, and it was like the eye mask and the background was like a plane because their original product was a jet lag mask. So always alluding back to that original messaging. What are they known for? What are they famous for? And how can this new product fall into that storytelling? That's where brands will succeed. So now here's where the brands will struggle. Those that are still using old school marketing tactics. So forcing influencers to read scripts. And guys, it's still happening. Like literally in my briefs, I will be fed scripts and I'm like, it's a no. Like, we cannot do this. Like, please. I don't mind sending concept overviews and making sure that things are greenlit. But I think having influencers read out a script for brand messaging is just immediately going to impact the performance of the video. If you let a creator be fun and be creative, which is literally what we're being paid to do, you will have better turnout in the end with the actual content. And isn't that the goal? And this is where I really struggle, because if the goal is to have the content perform, to ultimately get a consumer to purchase a product, wouldn't you want the creative person to come up with the best possible version of a creative outline? And that does not include scripting most of the time. There are a few exceptions. Sometimes there's brands that need a lot of legal to approve, I understand in that setting how you have to have a script because there's really no workaround if you're trying to avoid reshoots. But other than that, let the creators reign free, please, for the love of God. Okay. Now the next, brands that rely too heavily on influencer FOMO tactics. So like this endless cycle of limited edition drops. We alluded to this again on 2 weeks ago episodes talking about Chelsea Park, but like that whole idea of fear-mongering marketing, sometimes it can work, but often it really pisses off consumers. And I think brands need to rely less on that because right now they love that. They're just like, it's limited edition, buy it. It's like, okay, well then you're restocking it the next week and it doesn't really necessarily feel limited edition. So I think just being more cautious about, again, this is such a larger topic because it's really about brand strategy. Like how does a brand perceive themselves and how are they fitting into that marketing funnel online? So important. And then finally, those not listening to consumer feedback and continuing to push the more is more narrative, the more is more narrative. And again, this goes back to what I was alluding to, which is the de-influencing as a whole and the shift in general of the entire market. Like, I just don't know that content is going to be able to remain the bread and butter for me, for other influencers. There has to be a shift. And for myself personally, I feel when there's moments where I'm pulling back online, it's usually because there's a larger conversation at play that I need to wrap my head around. Clearly, this is it for me right now, the de-influencing culture and figuring out like, where do I fit in on this? And part of my way of jumping back and trying to push back against this narrative is perhaps education, which is where this podcast comes in, hopefully adding value to people, creating content where someone can learn something. So as opposed to trying to push a product, I can actually just teach someone something and give them value as opposed to trying to make them buy something at the end of the day. And I don't own my own product line. I don't own my own brand. So anytime I'm recommending a brand, it's actually recommending someone else's brand. So because of that, I think all of this has just made me take a step back and refocus and maybe say, okay, where is the future of my content and all of this in the de-influencing space? Because ultimately the shift is here. Like, we're already in it. So I have to adapt. And I mean, like, again, we've talked about this on other podcasts, but I think telling you guys that the struggles is such a wrong word. It's so funny. This is an aside, but I was listening to Millie Bobby Brown this morning and she was saying, oh, is it hard to live your dream? I said, oh my God, that's so true, right? Like sometimes we complain, oh, the struggle of being an influencer. It's like, no, it's not hard. I have the best job in the whole world, but these are just the nuances that start to make up just some challenges in an already fluctuating industry, right? So no, it is not hard to live my dream. However, we do need to remain vigilant and change with the times. So that leads to the final topic. Where do influencers go from here? And what is the future of social storytelling and social selling under the lens of de-influencing? So will influencer marketing slow down or just shift towards quality over quantity? This I wish I knew I wish I had the answer for, let alone I struggle with this every day. And what I'm chatting about now, it's like we really don't know the future of any industry, let alone an industry that really is in its infancy in some ways, but then also the Wild West in other ways. And also 10 years down the line in other ways. Like, I have been doing this for long enough that there is backtrack and there is record on it, but we just don't know where we're heading. So I think with that, more creators are turning to long-form educational content, like I alluded to, and storytelling-driven content rather than just rapid-fire hauls and selling products. And I'm on board with this. Like I said, I want to challenge myself. I want to come up with more educational content for you guys. I want to teach people things. I want to, bring positive energy to the world as opposed to just like constantly pushing products. And then on the flip side, I'm like, but I love when people sell me like the most iconic blazer or the most iconic new denim or the most amazing new lipstick. So I really struggle. There is always two sides to each coin when I do these episodes because I think that there's no perfect recipe. Like, I would like to see both exist, but I don't know that they will in the future. So I think where we're heading, if I am to wrap all of this in a pretty bow, is conscious influencing. So instead of hyping every new product, influencers really have to shift towards curating their favorites. And I really want to challenge myself to do this because I've even noticed myself over the years, like, oh, I love this wine. Oh, but I love this wine too. Oh, but I love this mascara, but I love this mascara too. It's like, okay, well, the people that do the best are the people that focus on one thing or two things, and you really recognize them for that. Like I can think of a few influencers where I will associate them with that brand, and that is powerful influencing. And I myself would like to be in that echelon. I don't think I'm there yet. And I think that's fair to say. I'll give myself my own critiques on my podcast. That's so fair to say. Like, I think I have been, at the mercy of whether it's working with too many brands and being spread too thin across different categories, or just taking on too much. And that's just the honest truth. But I think looking back and being a bit more self-reflective on it, I think there is opportunity for me to really hone in on what are my favorites. And, I just renovated my bathroom, and I looked in the bathroom this morning and I so clearly saw all of my favorite brands. It's like Fresh Beauty, Dermalogica, and Caudalie. Like those are like the 3 beauty brands that I like. Oh, and Cetaphil. Those are the 4. Those are like the 4 brands that like show up constantly in my 4 racks of beauty products. And I think that that's so important to acknowledge. It's like, no, you're not going to have like 20 brands that are all sold at Sephora that are your favorites. And that's cool to say. Like, I think that's cool to own the brands you love and be like, hey, these are my top 4 brands. These are the brands I use every day. These are the reason my face is not broken out with acne and I'm looking all glowy today. And same can be said with hair. Like I talk about Chatter's Hair Salon all the time. Like they are the sponsor of this podcast. They sell Dermalogica at literally their store. They have All My Tan at their store. They sell Coco and Eve. They have Moroccan Oil, which is like what I love for my hair. So again, I think standing behind brands where then my audience can associate me with those brands is at the utmost important, and I want to become better at that. And that's something in my goal list for 2025 is just being really conscious about the brands I stand behind. And even right now, I'm in a situation where I have a really cool upcoming brand experience, and the direct competitor of that brand has offered me like double the amount in monetary funds. Like they've basically offered me double the program, but it's their competitor and it's not who I work for. Well, I shouldn't say it's not who I work for. It's not what I use. So I'm like, I need to like stand behind the long-term partners. And again, this goes back to like your ethics as an influencer. Like, where is the line? Like, where will you draw the line? It's not just for money. Like, it's for what you stand for and the brands that you love and the brands you want to work for. And again, these are like longer conversations and something that's more real, I think, once you're deeper into this industry, because I understand like when you're just getting started, any brand coming to you is going to feel very exciting. But I think as, I'm 10 years into this, like for me, this is like very real, the relationships I have on the back end. And like, I'm not willing to just give up on my, I'm not willing to compromise essentially on my like ethics and morals to make somebody happy when I know that I like I said, have those top 4 favorites or have those top 2 favorites in different categories. That was such an aside. But anyways, back to what influencers can actually do to move forward in this de-influencing space. Another one is subscription-based platforms. So these have been interesting to watch on the rise. Like Substack is huge right now. People are really obsessed. And Patreon, obviously. So these are becoming alternative revenue streams for influencers who don't want to rely solely on brand deals. And I think that's amazing. Like if you have the time and space to actually build out platforms where people can be buying into more exclusive content, I think that's fantastic. My thing though is I really like to have that more relatability. Like for me personally, I like to have that more relatability piece with my audience. And I don't want to feel like there's a veil or like a paid wall where people have to pay to actually get the real me. So for now, as it stands, I don't have any of that, but I do think that that's a cool strategy if you were in that place. The other piece of it is the potential impact on platforms like TikTok Shop. So again, we don't have it here in Canada, but I am curious how the de-influencing space will impact TikTok Shop, because it's basically like shop to scroll pipeline. Like, so is that going to feel at risk now with this like shift in the way that we're experiencing influencer marketing? And then finally, are we heading towards a new era of creator monetization? So less product pushing, more direct-to-fan content like we just talked about, courses, educational content, subscription-based content, or exclusive content. And then how can influencers future-proof themselves in this new landscape? Again, like I struggle with this every day. I wish I had the answer for this. I don't. I think it's like we have to be nimble. And I've talked about this so many times, but it's like really being able to change with the times and being able to adapt, and not only adapt our strategies, but like openly throw things at the wall and see what sticks. I've been hearing a lot about the reel tab right now on Instagram, and people are really liking the trials feature. So I think like as the platforms introduce these new things, it's like we have to get excited and just like throw things at the wall, see what sticks, see what helps us grow, see what helps us find new audiences. And it's not a perfect art. And that is just the reality of any entrepreneur, but especially an entrepreneur in the creative industries. So some final takeaways, because this was like I took a big bite out today. So I just want to kind of wrap it up and give you guys some takeaways. So what should creators and brands do now? Okay, so for creators, one, and this is me, being intentional, fewer and better brand deals, more honest reviews, and focus more on audience trust. Now that is directly related to me. I want to like be more strategic about what brands I'm telling you that I love. I want to really hone in on the brands like that are my top pillars and talk about them at the utmost kind of like echelon, and then everything else is just gravy. Like I think like, for example, if it's Fresh Beauty and I love Fresh Beauty, like I want to give them that extra love, whether or not they're paying me for content or not, because I think when we do that, the brands see it and they hear it, and then they understand the brand loyalty and they want to get on board and they want to pay you for content. So it's like with one comes the other. So it's like one positive thing can lead to something else. And that's kind of what I'm leading forward to in 2025. For the brands, we're saying embrace transparency. Let creators have the freedom. Don't force them to oversell, and prioritize real advocacy over hype. Again, like I just alluded to, if you give creators the space to show the love, they will. And then ultimately, it will lead to such better collaboration down the line. And then finally, for consumers, and again, myself included in this, look for influencers who are genuinely aligned with your values, not just those pushing the latest viral trend. And I look at this a lot. Like I love micro influencers. I also love macro influencers, and I think certain macro influencers do it better than others. Trying to think of a great example. I think Molly May would be a great example of a macro influencer. She's got millions of followers, but she keeps it real. Like, you know, the brands she loves, you know, the brands that she associates herself with, and she doesn't veer away from that. And it's very admirable. Like as someone that's been in this industry that long, it is hard to do that. Like when you have a check staring at you and you have to turn down a deal, it makes it all that more real. And if you're at like a Molly May level, I can't even imagine what that would look like, all the no's she must say to maintain her authenticity. So again, it's not a perfect art, but I do believe that I can be better at it. And I think there's other influencers, maybe you're resonating with this right now as I'm talking about it, or you're an influencer that's like, oh, I'm newer to this industry and I've done a really good job at navigating what's worth taking and what's not. And I think there's a lot of influencers that are newer that have done this really well. And actually, I have an influencer coming on next week that I think will be a great example of this. And she's really honed in on her authentic self and has figured out the best way to integrate brands and then where it works and where it doesn't. And I think where I went wrong just doing the self-reflection is like I've been in this for so long that because that strategy and that arc didn't really exist 10 years ago, it's almost like I'm doing it backwards. Like now I'm trying to like fight back for my like authentic self to show up online. So I appreciate you going on that journey with me, and I appreciate you listening and hopefully having some feedback for me on this episode. If you do, share it with a friend or leave a comment in the comments section. You can leave us an Apple review. Any of that is very welcome as we grow the podcast. I hope this left you with some thoughts today. And like I said, this is an ever-evolving industry. But hey, in the words of Millie Bobby Brown, it is not hard to live my dream. So thanks so much for tuning in. I love you, mean it. See you in the next episode. Bye.